would it be more appropriate to review the debut of the truest man's man of film? Yeah, so I got commissioned to review a film from every era of James Bond. Some of these I've seen before, some of them I haven't. Kicking off with the one that started it all, Dr. No, which I have seen before. It's been a while. I think I only ever watched it the once, but it had been quite a while. It's been at least 20 years, probably longer, probably more like 23 or 24 years since the last time I saw this thing. So it's really interesting, being that, like, I do like Bond. I'm not a completionist. I still haven't seen all the Bond movies, but I do enjoy a good Bond film. I kind of fell in for them with GoldenEye, because that was the first one that came to theaters when I was at an age that it was appropriate for me to see it at the time it was in theaters. So I got into them then. I've seen all the ones that have come out since then, but I haven't backtracked for everything. So, Dr. No, the very first time James Bond graced the screen in a serious manner. I think the parody Casino Royale actually came out before this, but, canon James Bond came out. Sean Connery, in the role that kind of defined him in the popular imagination. Well, defined Connery and also defined James Bond. It's a weird thing to go back and see, because when you watch it, you can see all of the component pieces that are going to be essential to the identity of Bond. The suave, the exotic locations, the way with women, the action scenes, the big bases of the villain, a real nefarious mastermind kind of foe, and just the general vibe of the thing. But it's kind of, all those things are there, but they're kind of buried under just stuff. I think in a lot of ways this reflects the fact that this was trying to be true to the original work. And while I've never read any of the James Bond books, I know enough about them in terms of having read about or seen reviews from people who do know more about them to know that the books, especially the sort of the original ones before the movies took off, the books were very meticulous in terms of going through what it was that Bond did while out on mission. And you can definitely see why there's a validity to that, because Ian Fleming himself had some degree of experience in that sort of skullduggery kind of world, so he got to draw from his own knowledge. And in addition to that, it made the instances of chases or action stand out all the more because it wasn't happening start to finish the whole way through. There was a bit of a mundanity to his job, and that is actually present here. Now, that's the kind of thing that would get stripped away rather quickly as the series progressed and got more about the excitement. And once the world kind of decided that's what they wanted from Bond, you didn't need the mundane pieces around anymore to contrast it with, because it was basically contrasting with every other film out there, and Bond films kind of became a genre unto themselves after this. But it's weird to watch it. Like, here's a good example, but understand that the sort of thing I'm about to describe is all over the place. So there is a woman that Bond kind of suspects is involved with the stuff he's looking into. And he arranges for a date with her, goes to meet her. There is a little bit of a car chase where he's tailed on the way, but he manages to get that car to crash and blow up in rather spectacular fashion. That was a pretty impressive car crash. I'll just say that there. And he shows up. He can tell she wasn't really expecting him. And she is instructed with a quick phone call to just stall him, delay him for as long as she can. So, obviously, what you would expect to happen when Bond is alone in a room with an attractive woman for an extended period of time, that happens. He then calls a taxi because he decides he wants to eat out, and he shoves her into it, and it's just the people who he's working with who are going to take her away and interrogate her. He then goes back in the room, and you watch him arrange things. You watch him set up a big pillow underneath the sheet and then go and sit so that the door to the bedroom, when it opens, he'll be behind the open door. And you see him sit down and get his gun ready and start playing solitaire, waiting. You get the emphasis of the fact that he is going to wait, and you watch him set it up. Now, in any modern Bond film, that trick that he does, which is he's expecting an assassin to come, he sets up a dummy thing, that in and of itself is the sort of thing that a modern Bond film might still do. But the way a modern Bond film would do it is to follow the killer in, see the lump under the sheets, have them shoot it, and then reveal no, Bond actually knew what was going on, which implies all the stuff that in this movie you actually have to watch him do. And there's a lot of stuff like that. The amount of time we see for characters in transit from one place to another, it's not that it is like wrong to include it there, but it's just there longer stretches and more frequently than is really necessary. Like when Bond finally gets into the facility that the villain, the titular Dr. No, is running, we see him get taken through this whole decontamination thing because there's radiation on the island that he's on, which, okay, fine, but like you watch the whole process, every step of this decontamination, and then he gets walked through this hallway into this elevator. You have to watch him in the elevator, wait for the elevator to get somewhere, get taken out of the elevator, be brought into a dining room, sat down, they wait for the host. It's just the kind of stuff that a modern film, and even films slightly later in this own franchise, would tighten up a lot. And it's all just kind of there. So it's not that it's un-Bond, it's just flabby, is kind of the best way that I can put it. It is, like I said, it's got all the same stuff, but it's like it just hasn't really built itself in a refined manner yet. Everything's there that needs to be there. There's just also stuff that doesn't need to be there. Could have been done through implication. Could have established the same thing in a scene that was half the length of the one you used. Like at the start, we watch him be ordered by M to trade out his old Beretta for what will become his signature Walther PPK pistol. And there's a number of minutes dedicated to this and describing the issues with the old gun and the benefits of the new gun. But given that this is the first Bond film proper, none of this has any meaning. I guess in the books he had used the Beretta, because Dr. No is not the first book chronologically. He had used the Beretta before, so him getting it replaced with something else actually had some meaning. I suppose you could argue that in the film, because he's resistant to getting the Walther instead, it indicates some kind of sentimentality or he's a little stuck in his ways, but nothing comes of any of that. No plot point later in the film in any way reflects or depends or benefits from the fact that he has this particular gun or the implication that he's a little bit sentimental about things. Neither of those ever come into play. It's the exact kind of thing that I would look at and go, why is that scene there? So, yeah, that sort of thing is just sort of spread across it. Now, here's another thing that's interesting. I kind of expected to come into this and, well, see how bad the misogyny was. And I'm not going to say it's great. It's not, but you know what? I was actually way more thrown off by being reminded how racist this film is. In a kind of odd way, because there's actually a plethora of non-white characters in this, and of varying genders, and not even all the same race. We are dealing with various people of mixed ancestry. Dr. No himself is of German and Chinese descent. There's Quarrel, who is local Jamaican. We have a number of Asian operatives. There are some other people who it's not entirely clear where they're from, but they you get enough sense of, okay, well, you're not white. So there's a decent variety. So it's not like it's hammering on all people of X race is like this. But despite the variety and even the diversity, it could not escape me the fact that for all these individuals, I could not spot a single non-white character who was not either duplicitous, disposable, or subservient. Arguably, Quarrel, he's a good guy. He's not, but he gets killed, and not a big deal is made out of it. And he is subservient to Bond, established immediately. Just the fact that he even calls him Captain as like a name, because that's not his rank. He just calls him that because it's like his default thing to call the white man who hires his boat. Just call him Captain. So that runs through the whole thing, top to bottom. And it is weird because there are so many of people of color. The fact that I couldn't find any that did not end up being at least one of those three things was a little bit, okay. Now, on the misogyny issue, it doesn't help that the classic Bond girl, played by Ursula Andress, called Honey Rider, because Bond, she has zero purpose in this. At no point does she contribute to what is going on in any way, shape, or form. She is neither a benefit nor a hindrance to Bond. The point at which he gets captured, it seems pretty clear he would have gotten captured even if she wasn't around. She's never helpful. She doesn't really even impact the plans of the villain by her presence. And also not super in love with the fact that, it gets implied that she basically gets tossed to the guards to have fun with. And enough time passes, both time elapsed that we see, along with implied even more time than that, because James gets knocked out, that I find it very doubtful he rescued her from that. He rescues her from the base, she doesn't die, but, I don't think, realistically, he rescued her from other stuff, which, little gross. But, like I said, all the component parts of what people, including myself, like about Bond are all present. And it is interesting. There is sort of one really interesting thing, particularly about Connery's Bond, and they kind of brought this back a bit with Daniel Craig's Bond, which is the brutality and the harsh efficiency of the man. He's not above a quip, and he certainly can be dashing, but he's more likely to brute force his way through things than to try and suave his way through things. So, like, for example, when I mentioned before about, tricking a would-be assassin with a fake pillow under the sheet, when that guy comes in, fires a whole bunch of shots into that, Bond starts interrogating him a little bit, tells him to put his gun down. The guy, later goes for his gun and tries to shoot at Bond, and it doesn't go, and Bond just goes, "That's a Smith & Wesson, you've had your 6, and shoots the guy, and once he's on the ground, shoots him again. That's not really quite a one-liner. It's just a very matter-of-fact reason for why that guy's going to die now. And it is, when I say it's interesting that he's such a blunt instrument. He is a sledgehammer. He's not a scalpel. And the sort of disappointment that Dr. No has when he meets him, because Dr. No kind of assumes that anybody who's going to actually legitimately become a thorn in his side must be someone of intelligence, must be somebody who's a worthy adversary. And then he meets Bond, and he's so let down, because Bond hasn't outthought him. Bond hasn't, figured out everything he's up to. Bond just is a bull in a china shop, and he just kept charging forward because he managed to bust through several barriers. He got further than anyone else by being pig-headed and brutish, not by being smarter. At least not smarter beyond what you would expect someone like him with his training to have. And again, that sort of meticulousness that we see is reflective of that. He does have base level training. We see him do all these tricks like, kind of stick a hair across his closet so that people won't see it, but he'll be able to tell if that hair is broken or gone. Somebody went into his closet while he was out. And, puts a little dust on his briefcase, so he'll be able to see if there are fingerprints on it later. Did somebody try and get in his briefcase? So, all this falls under training. The things any 00 or any agent in his line of work should be able to do. And he has those skills. But then the thing that he brings unique to the plate is he's just gonna bash at things until they submit. So I kind of appreciate that this film has an acknowledgement of that. And that's not to say Sean Connery isn't cool. He is, but he's not really aggrandized quite to the same degree that I feel like he had a tendency to be in later entries in the franchise. I don't know if this is a movie I would recommend to anyone who either doesn't have nostalgia for it or isn't a completionist. Because, again, in terms of pacing, Bond isn't even at the island where the vast majority of the stuff is set until a half hour in. We don't meet the Bond girl for an hour in. We don't meet the villain whose name is the title of the movie for an hour and a half into a nearly 2-hour movie. It's a little bit of a grind. I'm not going to lie. But it is fascinating from sort of a franchise archaeological standpoint to sort of go back and piece together, oh, that's where that came from. There's the first instance of that. Oh, this would later evolve into. So, from that perspective, it's quite fascinating. But as a piece of entertainment unto itself, it's dated. That's about the nicest thing I can say. I can definitely get why this took off in terms of, when we get the action, the size of the explosions in some cases, the exotic locales, the very, frequently useless but very gorgeous female characters. I get it, but yeah, this is not something I'd watch for pleasure again. Dr. No, when was the last time you saw it, if you've seen it at all? What are your thoughts about it, or what are your thoughts on Bond in general? Sean Connery's Bond in particular. Ooh, God, why did I start to do... I should have committed. I started to do the voice, but then I backed off. I'm like, I shouldn't do that, so I ended up, half doing it, ugh, don't. So, whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon. I mentioned I was commissioned to review these. That was how it was done. It is my birthday this month, so forgive me for ham-fistedly saying if you want to get me something nice, support on the Patreon is kind of what I prefer. Failing that, I do have wish lists and a P.O. box down in the description. But even if you don't want to do any of that, just like, share, subscribe. They all help me out. But you also don't have to. I take a relaxed attitude around here, so just come on back next time you need a break.